Jewish tradition offers many gifts, but perhaps the most profound wisdom it has to offer, the thing we get most right, are our rituals around death and mourning. Our tradition teaches us that the first week after a loss is different from the first month, which is different than the first year. While we never forget those who died, the early days of mourning stand alone, stark and life-altering, a time when we cannot be expected to carry on our lives as usual. The word Shiva means 7, the number of days that new mourners are encouraged to step out of the flow of the world and allow ourselves to be comforted by friends and family and memory. Why 7 days? One answer comes to us in a midrash: to match the 7 days of creation. Just as it took God 7 days to create a world that resulted in each human life, so too it takes us at least that long to adjust to the reality of a world in which one of those lives is gone. As slowly and methodically as God began and ended each stage of creation, we are forced to encounter the first Monday without our loved one, and then the first Tuesday. There was evening, and there was morning, a third day, and a fourth, and a fifth, and a sixth, and until we find that we have made it through a whole week in which creation has continued to unfold despite our loss. This week's Torah portion, Chukat, is suffused with loss and mourning. It begins with the inscrutable laws of the red heifer. Moses is instructed that anyone who touches a dead body is rendered tameh, ritually impure, for 7 days, after which they would be sprinkled with the ashes of a pure red calf and become fit for service again. This shall be the law for all time, the text says. And yet in the very next chapter, we learn that the prophet Miriam has died with no obvious ritual for mourning. Moses and Aaron, newly bereaved, are beset by the community of Israelites who complain about lack of water. God tells Moses and Aaron to speak to a rock to make water appear, but instead they lash out. "Listen, you rebels, shall we get water for you out of the rock?" they say, and then Moses impulsively strikes the rock in anger. Water flows, but as a result of this impulsive outburst, God tells Moses he will be forbidden to enter the promised land. There's a reason we are told to stop everything when we suffer a loss. If we try to proceed as though nothing happened, our grief will express itself in unhelpful and destructive ways. The people seem to learn this lesson. When Aaron dies later in that same chapter, the whole community stops and mourns him for 30 days before moving on. Earlier this week, my family marked the end of Shiva for my father-in-law, and I was reminded again and again over that week of the wisdom of our tradition's encouragement to pause, to allow the world to recreate itself around us as we took time to cry and laugh and take comfort in the company of our community. Tonight, we mark the end of a different kind of Shiva. 1 week ago today, we learned that the constitutional right to end a pregnancy, the law of the land for nearly 50 years, had been abolished. Overnight, the right to bodily autonomy for millions of Americans was torn away, sowing chaos and confusion, opening the door to an officially sanctioned regime of servitude in the form of forced pregnancy. For Jews, this was also an assault on our religious freedom, since our tradition allows and in some cases mandates the termination of a pregnancy if it threatens a woman's life or well-being. And a concurring opinion in the Dobbs decision carried a foreboding threat to other cherished freedoms, the rights to birth control, and to the legal recognition of marriages between LGBTQ couples, marriages we are proud to sanctify on this bema. For those of us who have had abortions, the decision caused us to contemplate an alternative universe in which we had been unable to control if, when, and how we became parents. If you have spent this week feeling numb or depressed or frozen, know that's what Shiva is for. When our world has come undone, we are allowed to freeze in place for a week, grappling with how to face a world that we no longer recognize, before moving forward to find a way to live. As grief counselors tell us, grief can express itself in many different ways: denial, anger, bargaining, and this week we saw all of those played out in the public square as Americans struggled to understand how exactly our world had changed. Many who were devastated by the decision were like Moses, striking the rock and demanding water. We wanted to do something, anything, right now. My social media feed was filled with people offering to transport people to different states for medical care or call for a general strike. These well-intentioned suggestions were met with wise and compassionate response by those who have been preparing for this day for years in light of the changing court. They said, "Don't reinvent the wheel. Sit, take a breath. Find those who know how to act most skillfully and follow their lead." What our hurried, impulsive responses overlooked was the importance of taking time to grieve. Like Moses and Aaron, when we fail to set aside time to mourn what we have lost, we are prone to take rash action that may do more harm than good. I know there are some listening for whom this wasn't a moment of mourning, but of triumph. I am unlikely to change your minds. Instead, I simply urge you to recognize how deeply shaken so many of your friends, colleagues, and families are by this news. Know when you speak to us that you are entering a Shiva house, and meet us with compassion. At the end of Shiva, we take a walk around the block to mark our re-entry into the public sphere. It's my hope that those of you who were devastated by the Supreme Court's decision have allowed yourself the room to grieve what we have lost. And now, as we get up from Shiva, we prepare to re-enter a world that is still a work in progress. We know that creation did not end on the seventh day. Instead, we are all a part of its continued unfolding. The world may not look like it did before, but we have been given the power to help shape it. May God grant us each the strength, wisdom, and patience to find a path forward that will lead us to a world of greater compassion, justice, freedom, and hope. Shabbat Shalom.